Okay, let's go ahead and wrap up our section here on the Middle East during the Cold War or after World War II by talking about culture of the Middle East. And I want to start by kind of just trying to define the Middle East. Let me see if I can pull the map for you here. This is a map of what some might call the Middle East. I want to start by saying, look, the Middle East is a very European term. Okay, a lot of the terms we use, our culture is largely influenced by Europe, created by the Brits, a lot of European influence. And to think that, okay, Europe is the West, and this is the Middle East, and then this would be the Near East, and then we have Southeast Asia and the Far East. We'll start by saying this is a Eurocentric term. And when I look at this, I say, who are we talking about here? What are the factors that make the Middle East? The Middle East. Is it language? Well, we have Turkish people, we have Arabic speaking people, we have Persian speaking people, Afghans. Is it religion? Well, maybe that's what it is, because these are all majority Muslim countries. But then what about Morocco? What about, you have West Africa down here? Some of the Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, etc. I don't know. So before we even enter this conversation, I just want to start it off by saying, what are you talking about, book? What are you talking about? Anyone when we talk about the Middle East? And the reason I bring this up is because, well, I mean, I think a lot of people might call Turkey not Middle Eastern. This is the Anatolian Peninsula. This area has been largely more influenced, arguably, by Greece than by, say, Saudi Arabia, the center of the modern Muslim culture. Sudan. Well, Sudan is now split in half, South Sudan and North Sudan. Is really Sudan or Afghanistan? Persia, Iran? What's the linkage? Pakistan is Muslim. This is Encyclopedia Britannica. This isn't just some random source. I don't know. But what we do know, and we're going to try and take it back a bit beyond where the book starts, is that after World War I, the Middle East is broken up by the Brits and the French. Saudi Arabia becomes its own country. Egypt, which had been kind of passed around by European powers, gets its independence. Libya was controlled by the Italians all the way until after World War II. Turkey formed itself out of the old Ottoman Empire. Iran was historic Persia. Afghanistan has been a land that historically was very less developed. It's a very mountainous region. It's largely influenced by the Uzbekistan, the Tajikistan countries, who are largely influenced by the Soviet Union during that period. But before that, we go back. We say, where's the connection? And after World War II, we're going to find that American culture flourishes around the world. Okay, America becomes the world power, and you're either American culture or you're Soviet cultured. And I mean, arguably here, we'll say Afghanistan maybe had a little more Soviet culture. And maybe the rest of this area was largely influenced by American culture. And in the 1970s, a movement begins to kind of question whether or not these countries, these historic Middle Eastern countries, wanted America to be the future cultural influence, or if they wanted to try and bring back the religious influence of Islam. Okay, America is a more majority Christian country. It was more so after World War II than it is today. And European culture is largely Christian culture. Middle Eastern countries are going to say, well, what about our religion? Why aren't we following it? And well, going back to the 1800s, there was a movement called Wahhabism in what's modern day Saudi Arabia, and it used to just be called Arabia, part of the Ottoman Empire. This was a religion of Islamic fundamentalists, people who wanted to read the book, the Quran, and their holy texts as word by word, meaning exactly taking it to be word for word truth, instead of oftentimes people will read into historic texts, religious historic texts, and take meanings from them, right? This is what they meant. There's a story behind it. There's a moral of the story instead of a strict reading of the text. And this movement evolves as culture evolves, as wars happen. And in the 1970s, we're seeing this really large American influence in the Middle East. We know that after World War I, Turkey secularizes. Okay, they really kind of push back against the Islamic influence and try and actually take more of a European culture. This is why I question if Turkey belongs in this group. Iran is formed, and they do allow the very strong religious influence in their new country. Saudi Arabia, which is the center of the Islamic faith, is still very, very strict religion, or maybe a little, let's call it a little more strict Islam than we were going to find in some of these other countries. And in the 1970s, there's a revolution. 1979, there's a revolution in Iran. And we're going to see that after the kind of dust settles, that Islamic fundamentalist group takes the majority of the power in Iran. And one of the things they're going to do is push back against American culture in Iran. Now, a lot of this, honestly, has to do with women and women's rights. Women have the right to vote in Iran, and I actually want to take a second here. We're gonna pause for a second here. We're gonna look at, and let's see if I can set this thing. Just actually, we're gonna look at the history of these Middle Eastern countries and women's rights to vote. Okay, just for fun, the United States gives women the right to vote following World War I. It's an amendment to the Constitution, the 19th, and we're talking 1919. And before that, women didn't have the right to vote in America. This isn't like America's always given women equal rights. Europe has always given women equal rights. We know that's not true. And the right to vote is the beginning of equal rights for women. It takes a long time, and arguably women still don't have full equal rights, not having that, even in our country today, even in Europe today, I'm not having that conversation today. But the right to vote is the beginning of a march towards equal rights. So when we find out that in these countries, when women got the right to vote, we can find out if there is going to be a march towards equality. Remember, Palestine, which is British territory, women get the right to vote. And right as Britain takes control, we're going to see Syria, Lebanon. These are all European influences, British and French decisions, right? Not the decisions necessarily of the people. Again, Lebanon, education required, Lebanon universal. We're looking at Middle Eastern countries. We start moving down. Look, Iran, 1963. Women have the right to vote. They still do. Libya, Sudan, give women the right to vote in the 60s. We move down. Bahrain, small country in the Arabian Peninsula. Iraq, 1980. Although the first ever free elections were held after the U.S. War, and the U.S. took control of this country in 2005. So again, Western power. Kuwait and in Qatar, Afghanistan, Well, Afghanistan here after the US again, Kuwait and Qatar in 1999. When we get the right to vote. Kuwait again, 2005. The UAE off the Arabian Peninsula, 2006. And it wasn't until 10 years ago that women got the right to vote in Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is really kind of one of, it's the center. Is the Islamic faith. It maybe is the center of the Middle East, cultural center. Okay. So we have an Islamic revolution that's going to happen, and we have an Islamic fundamentalist group who takes power in 1979. And one thing they want to do is pull away from American influence, understanding women to have the right to vote. This is a magazine cover in Islam before the Islamic Revolution, and this young Islamic lady looks like American lady or European lady in terms of her style of dress and her hair being shown, which is a big thing in Islamic culture, is that women are supposed to keep their hair covered. There's this documentary called Afghan Star about how in Afghanistan, it was like an American Idol type TV show after the Americans came in and conquered in 2002 and tried to spread some culture. And this woman, she was one of the finalists, and she's singing, you know, she's doing her thing. She's younger, and she rips off her head covering, and her headscarf, and people freak out. It's like she had just exposed herself. And they like get death threats at her house. Her dad kicks her out. It's like, it's a horrible thing. You guys, I'm going to show part of that in the class. Anyway, so showing of the hair is a big deal, right? Pose in front of a car, looking, like I said, a very American influence. This is a picture of many Iranian women today, again, wearing the headscarf. And if you can actually get a ticket in Iran, in the major city of Tehran, for not covering your hair if you're a woman. And this, 15 years ago, you could get more than just a ticket for not covering your hair if you're a woman in Iran. This, in Iran, again, is one of the more modern. Middle Eastern countries. When we look at Saudi Arabia, women couldn't drive until 10 years ago. That's maybe where it's the strictest. I don't know. We'll get into the conversation about Saudi Arabia in a second. This is Afghanistan in the 70s. These are Afghan women. They look to me like, American women of the 60s and 70s, getting off work or something along these lines. This is how Afghan women dress today. Not allowed to show any skin other than their hands. In some countries, they're not allowed to show any skin other than their hands and their face. I guess Afghan women are showing their eyes here. After you get to be a certain age, so again, what we're seeing is that women. This is a women's rights issue. If a woman is not allowed to show any skin in public, not that that's like a big deal, but that's control, right? And that goes back to women's rights. Just to kind of bring it back around, this is how American pilgrim women dressed, having to cover their hair. And I believe, and I'm not a biblical expert by any stretch, the Bible says that for Christians, women are supposed to cover their hair in church. I mean, that's not how it's done today. I don't know for sure, but I've been to a church before, and I've never seen a church where it's required of a woman to cover their hair. They may be out there. What do I know? I'm very not a religious expert. So there's a tradition in Christianity that has similarities. This is a big part of it. Let me kind of continue through the history of this. This Wahhabist movement, and I want to, so I don't hear it talked about often, but not only is the Wahhabist movement connected to modern Saudi Arabian culture and Islamic fundamentalism in Afghanistan and even in in part in Iran. But they took over the Grand Mosque. Extremists did in Saudi Arabia in 1980, and the Saudi Arabian government made a deal. They said, look, we'll let you teach your values. We'll teach your values in school if you allow us to continue to stay in power. So there's kind of a power sharing arrangement in Saudi Arabia as well. Women lost many rights during this period. Arts and sciences were cut out of society in most Muslim cultures, especially Western art and sciences. And just to kind of look at this word science, right? When we think about maybe Christian fundamentalists, these were the people who led the anti-evolution movement. Evolution being taught in schools movement. Think about the Scopes trials. So again, look, we know that Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are all connected. They all started with the same book. They're all religions of Abraham. So you're going to find the connections here between different fundamentalists of all of these groups. In 1881, Muslim extremists killed the Egyptian president, which kind of said, hey, you better be more fundamentalist. Egypt. And Egypt is not one of those countries that is as fundamentalist. They all are varying degrees of extreme fundamentalism and expectations of dress and of behavior. Muslim extremists would eventually take over most countries in the Middle East. And we're going to see that on September 11th, 2001, the United States is attacked by a group led by a Muslim extremist that was upset. And in his writings, in his reasoning for what he did, why he attacked our country on September 11th, 2001 in New York and in DC, I think number 3 and 4 had to do with the influence of US culture in these areas and US corporations in this area. I had a great friend, her name was Marina. She's an Egyptian colleague. And she would tell me that, yeah, like when you are in these areas, she's from these areas, or she's been there, her family's from there. She'd say, like, McDonald's is extremely offensive for some reason, because it looks like McDonald's in America, like the red with the golden arches. And you have all these kind of like traditional looking buildings and culture and society and maybe the bazaar, right? And all of a sudden, McDonald's, it just kind of sticks out. And that's something that amongst her family, she would hear people talking about. I don't know. Also, we're gonna find that, like, you know, another thing that she would tell me is that, like, when you go to the newspaper, that magazine rack, that the American and the European magazines would be sold there. She would tell me that when you go to the nightclubs, Jordan specifically, she would bring up Israel. Of course, is not Israel's a different culture there now. That you would hear American music, and that this is offensive to Islamic fundamentalists. So after revolutions of the 70s and moving into the early 80s, we did see a shift in culture in the Middle East. We saw a very strong pulling away from American and European culture. And to this day, it still is happening. I mean, Saudi Arabia, maybe the leader is bending a little bit, giving women the right to vote and drive and participate more in society. But we know the story of Malala. She was an Afghan student who was shot for trying to go to school. Like, the Taliban is resurging in Afghanistan, trying to push that fundamentalist view again. There's big pushback against the influence of the U.S. and the Europeans.